Greetings, folks. My name is Ronwise Gamgee, and welcome to Quick and Dirty Roleplaying. I want to continue where I left off with my last video, where I talked about my favorite Mutants and Masterminds 2nd edition supplements, the introduction of Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition via the DC Adventure Heroes Handbook, and some of the major changes between 2nd edition and 3rd edition. As I mentioned in the last video, the current edition of Mutants and Masterminds as of this recording is the 3rd edition, which was published in 2010. Wow, that's quite a long time actually, and by the looks of it, it doesn't look like Green Ronin Publishing will produce a 4th edition of Mutants and Masterminds. It honestly doesn't need to, in my opinion. While Mutants and Masterminds was first conceived and produced in the heyday of the D20 system, Dungeons & Dragons had drastically departed in game design when it went into its 4th edition back in 2008. Clearly, the evolving game design found in Mutants & Masterminds 3rd edition indicated that it not only wanted to distinguish itself from Dungeons & Dragons even more so than before with the change in nomenclature of many of its core traits, it would actually expand what can be done with the D20 system's mechanics in ways that no other D20 system-like game has done. An example that immediately comes to mind is that of the feats/advantages that allow characters to lower one combat-related trait in order to increase another, which are accurate attack, all-out attack, defensive attack, and power attack. In previous editions, and in other D20 system games that used these feats, you needed the feat in question in order to perform those kinds of trade-offs. Those feats still exist in Mutants and Masterminds 3rd edition, but there are also maneuvers of the same name that allow you to make those kinds of trade-offs to a lesser extent. For example, the accurate attack maneuver lets you take up to a -2 penalty to your damage or powers effect in exchange for a bonus of the same amount to your attack roll. The attack accurate advantage, which costs 1 point to acquire, increases the damage or power ranks penalty up to -5, while giving you a bonus of the same amount to your attack roll. So it basically lets you go more extreme than with just the maneuvers. The great thing about these maneuvers is that it allows players to experiment with different tactics by default, while allowing them to specialize with certain tactics if they wish, through spending points. Now, with that being said, despite its innovations, there were parts in every edition of Mutants and Masterminds that I found limiting and difficult to work around due to the nature of its design. First off, I found the available options for limiting a character's power usage somewhat unsatisfying. The methods that come to mind are as follows. Applying the tiring flaw to a power, which reduces the power's cost by -1 per rank. So basically, whenever you use a power with this flaw, you take on 1 level of fatigue. Mind you that you can only take 2 levels of fatigue and still function. Having 1 level of fatigue cuts your movement rate in half, and then having 2 levels of fatigue not only does that, but it gives you a -2 penalty on all of your rolls on top of that. With 3 levels of fatigue, you're incapacitated, which makes you easier to hit, being unable to move, and being unable to perceive your surroundings until you recover from that condition. And to top it off, not even the energizing extra of the healing power lets you remove your own fatigue, which would be game-breaking, because energizing makes it so that you remove the fatigue from others and take it on yourself. You can't logically do that to yourself. For a flaw that only reduces the cost per rank of a power by -1, this flaw seriously messes you up. Neither I nor anyone that I've known has ever applied this flaw to any of their characters' powers because it's not worth the point discount. The only way you can avoid this fatiguing effect is by spending a hero point, which are precious and few, and those are typically reserved for re-rolling poor toughness defense rolls. Then another way that you can limit a power's usage is by applying the check required flaw to a power. Also, well, this one is actually just -1, a -1 flat cost per rank of the flaw. So basically what this means is that in order for you to use your power with this flaw, you need to make a skill check against a target number of 10 plus the rank of this flaw in order to activate it. And the rank of the power, when it's activated, is equal to the amount that you succeed on the skill check or the power's rank, whichever is lower. Alright, so let me untangle that spaghetti with an example. So say, for example, you have like a magic blast power at rank 10. And in order to reduce the power cost of it, you take 5 ranks of the check required flaw. So basically, if you want to cast this spell, you need to first roll like the appropriate skill check. Say it's like expertise, magic or something like that. So you make your roll, and if you don't get at least a 15, then your power just doesn't even activate. But if you do pass 15, the power of, or the rank of the power that you use it at is limited to how much you beat it by. So say you roll like a 19, that's 4 above 15. So you let out your power at rank 4, even though you purchased your power at rank 10. Now, if you happen to exceed this roll by more than 10, then the limit is still the rank of your power. Hopefully that helps. And if it doesn't, rewind it and then listen to it again and write it out if you need to. So this is actually a pretty creative flaw to represent a character who hasn't mastered spell casting or psychic power manifestation, as well as for settings where these actions are inherently unreliable. Probably the only issue I have here is that the points you're getting back from this flaw can be used to buy double the amount of ranks in the skill needed to use said power. But this is mitigated by the fact that barely passing those skill checks doesn't let you unleash the full power of, well, your power. And that rolling a natural 1 is an automatic failure. So another way that you can limit a power's usage is by invoking the complication rules to make a power unusable for the rest of the scene or until an appropriate action is taken. And doing this rewards the affected player 1 hero point. So in my previous video, I had mentioned that whenever a complication came up and it affected the character, they suffered whatever consequence the consequence was, and were rewarded a hero point in the process. One of the consequences that can happen is that for some reason you're unable to use your powers at that time. This method is more hand-wavy than the others, but a player could elect to have this happen to their character if they wished, which I think is pretty cool. It allows players to affect the narrative in a way that hinders them, but with some compensation. So it encourages players to create more dramatic situations as opposed to just win-win-win. Invoking a complication, it puts the power of limiting a power's usage largely in the hands of a GM, however. So there has to be a good amount of trust between the players and the GM. And seeing that I lean more towards narrative tabletop RPGs nowadays, I don't mind this method, but it's probably something that I'd be inclined to leave in the hands of the players themselves, since using this mechanic is really not predicated on anything other than whim. It's not like as a reaction to something in the narrative. Another way that, probably the last method that I'm going to talk about in detail about limiting a power's use, is the fades flaw to a power, and this lowers the power's cost by -1 per rank of the power. So when you have the fades flaw on a power, as you use it, it gets weaker and weaker until it reaches rank 0, which makes it unusable at that point. So say you have, again, like I mentioned before, like a rank 10 like Power Blast, and you have the fades flaw on all ranks of this power. You use a Power Blast, okay, then it goes down to rank 9. Use it again, then it goes down to rank 8 until it goes down to rank 0. Now, regarding the method of recovering those lost power ranks, that can vary, but it generally requires at least 1 hour of non-combat activity. This is a pretty niche flaw when it comes to I guess, to the narrative component of it, and it's not one that I've ever used either with characters that I've made or have sorry, I'm having a brain fart here or have told another player, you know what, this looks like the kind of flaw that, you know, that would fit your character concept. Now, it's certainly not as punishing as the tiring flaw, even though it's worth the same point cost reduction. Because here, you know, if you have like a pretty high rank power, you can use it many more times than a power with the tiring flaw, and without really getting like screwed over so much. So in order to not have this video go on for like half an hour or something like that, other ways of limiting power usage include the limited flaw, the quirk flaw, the side effect flaw, the uncontrolled flaw, and the unreliable flaw. Now that now that I've actually talked about them at length, there are actually many ways to limit power usage with the base game system. But what if I wanted to implement like a magic point system for all of my powers, like in JRPGs? By default, I can't do that with Mutants and Masterminds. Yes, there is the energy points option from the Masterminds manual, but that applies to all characters if used, and it honestly comes off as kind of a half-baked idea in its implementation, because everyone gets, I believe it's like a base 100 energy points, and then I believe you needed to spend like one point in order to get 10 more energy points to your maximum, and I think doing the reverse will award you more points. But this is a mechanic that was supposed to be implemented for Mutants Masterminds 2nd edition. Not that it's that hard to like port over to 3rd edition, but I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm just, the way I'm thinking about it makes it too limiting. But in any case, in the previous editions of Mutants Masterminds, there was a power flaw. I think it was called either charges or limited use, where depending on like how bad you want to limit your powers, like at a -1 cost per rank, you can use that power 5 times a day. At a -2 cost per rank, 3 times a day. And then at a -3 cost per rank, just 1 time of day. That's more of what I'm looking for, but it doesn't have a whole lot of variety as to how I want to limit my power. So I'd mentioned that Mutants and Masterminds offered around 90% of what you can make in the hero system, but only like 10% of the complexity. I mean, besides being like a somewhat hyperbolic claim, the main limitation of Mutants and Masterminds has to do with its granularity, meaning like how finely detailed you can do stuff. The system that I was talking about regarding limiting power usage is actually handled properly in the hero system. because it has things like where you can emulate like magazines, and also a greater amount of like power uses before like you're no longer able to use the power. And also by default it has an energy pool system, and that one is it's not set at like 100 or anything, but it is set at like a base for each character. So in order to deal with this limited amount of granularity, people playing Mutants and Masterminds have to manage their expectations and make conceits with it. For example, like the counting ammunition, as I mentioned before, is at best handled with a complication or a specialized quirk flaw that a GM improvises in both effect and point cost reduction. Multiple attacks in a combat round and dual wielding a weapon in each hand are also not a thing, unlike many other D20 based games, including Dungeons and Dragons. First edition allowed you to do these things, but it was pretty unbalanced. So the conceit you have to make with dual wielding combat is probably to create a damage effect, or if you want to, like, I guess, complicate it a little more, to emulate, like, oh, I'm hitting you multiple times, so I'm dealing more damage. You put the multi-attack extra, so you can deal that extra damage if you exceed the target's defense roll by a certain amount. Or, oh, I'm hitting like multiple guys, you know, the multi-attack extra allows you to do that as well. Now, as I'm talking about these conceits and I'm mentioning ways in which you can like work them around by like tweaking with the powers and modifiers, you know, some of these, I guess, the methods that which you need to go through in order to have these things happen may not gel with some people, and I think this makes Mutants and Masterminds less appealing than it can be. Another beef I have with the game is that although accuracy and damage are priced the same goes with evasion and toughness, it's actually better in the long run to favor damage over accuracy or toughness over evasion, because the toughness roll has a parry roll or dodge roll that precedes it, and therefore it acts as a buffer. So if you're Dodgy McDodgerson, but you're made of glass, then all it takes is a lucky attack roll on the part of your attacker, and your chances of getting pancaked are very high. In the reverse situation, however, you may take more hits than usual, but some of those attacks will miss, and then the ones that do get through are much more likely to be resisted with like less consequence. Now, it's not like a guarantee that you know, you're just going to always be able to take more damage in a fight and last longer this way, but the statistics of it all do veer towards those outcomes. And I haven't even included incorporating fortitude or will defenses into the mix, as those tend to get skimped on how uncommon poison or mental attacks come into play. This makes certain character concepts more viable than others, given that they're built on the same amount of points. And that's what it all came down for me, like as time went on with Mutants and Masterminds: points and game balance. Being preoccupied by this stuff not only made my game slower, it made creating characters slower and designing adventures take longer. I didn't want to cheat my players, so I statted out my antagonists and made sure that all their traits were accounted for point-wise. That honestly turned out to be a huge waste of time and energy, so I ended up making my antagonist's power level relative to the PC's, up or down, plus or minus 1 to plus or minus 5, depending on how difficult or easy I wanted them to be. Now, I love Mutants and Masterminds, and I'm pretty damn good at teaching it to others and running it at the game table, but over time, I found other game systems that are better suited for more specific experiences, mainly not supers, all while allowing for a great deal of customization. You know, give me one moment so I can grab those games that I've talked about. Let me see. Yeah. So the first of those games is Savage Worlds. And while there's a superpower supplement for it, which I also have, the Savage Worlds Superpowers Companion. I've never used it, and I've heard that it breaks past a certain point due to having multiple damage dice explodes, thus turning almost anything into chunky salsa. Also, as time has gone on, my tastes in the games that I'd like to run have gone from the more traditional simulationist type to the more narrative style of Powered by the Apocalypse and variations thereof. But the spirit of freedom that I indulge with in Mutants Masterminds has always stayed with me, and for that I am grateful. Now, if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details of Mutants Masterminds 3rd edition, but are not ready to shell out $40 for the Deluxe Heroes Handbook, or $30 for the Basic Heroes Handbook, which omits the point buy stuff and I wouldn't recommend, check out the D20 Hero System reference document online. The link will be in the description. That concludes the 4-part series of my history with Mutants and Masterminds. It's been so long since I've been heavily into Mutants and Masterminds that I've forgotten a lot of the little details, but for a very long time, this was like my tabletop role-playing game Lego set. I've toyed around with it a lot, made a fair number of characters, made lots of powers, such as all of the abilities for the classes in World of Warcraft Wrath of the Lich King, as well as all the abilities in Monty Cook's World of Darkness, and I've made plenty of house rules for it as well. I honestly wouldn't mind playing or running a game of Mutants and Masterminds at some point in the future, though I don't want to deal with overly complicated builds like shapeshifters, hunters, summoners, or any Hunter characters, or Hunter x Hunter for those not in the know. So until next time, take care folks, and play to find out what happens.